You didn't see a message, you didn't find anything, nothing obvious happened, but something changed, and you felt it before you could name it. Maybe it was the way she replied, shorter than usual, a little delayed, the kind of response that technically answers the question, but somehow says less than it used to. Or maybe it was her energy in person, still present, still functional, but slightly elsewhere. Like a part of her attention that used to be fully in the room with you is now pointed somewhere else. You can't prove it. You can't point to one specific thing, but the feeling is there and it's persistent, and somewhere underneath the uncertainty, a part of you already knows what it means. This is one of the most disorienting experiences a man can have in a relationship. Not because it's dramatic, it's actually the opposite of dramatic. It's quiet, gradual, a series of micro shifts that individually could mean nothing, but together form a pattern that means everything. And the men who navigate it worst are always the ones who wait for an explanation before they trust what they're already feeling. Here's the first thing you need to understand. Attention is never neutral. It is always directed somewhere, always allocated, always reflecting a set of internal priorities that exist whether or not they're ever spoken out loud. When a person's attention shifts, really shifts, at the level of genuine internal focus, the behavior follows automatically, not always intentionally, not always consciously, but consistently, because behavior is downstream of attention. Where the focus goes, the energy goes, and where the energy goes, everything visible eventually follows. This is why the early signals are behavioral, not verbal. People don't announce a shift in their internal focus. They don't sit down and say, something has changed in where my attention is going. That conversation almost never happens at the beginning. Instead, the shift shows up first in the small things, in the texture of daily interaction, in the things that used to be automatic and now require a slight, barely perceptible effort. And if you know what to look for, if you understand the pattern rather than waiting for the explanation, you can read what's happening long before anyone says a word. Let's talk about the specific signals, because they're consistent enough across enough situations to function almost like a checklist. The first one is consistency, or more precisely, the disruption of it. Before anything else changes, consistency changes. The rhythm of communication that was established, the timing of replies, the regularity of check-ins, the predictable pattern of daily contact. That rhythm becomes irregular, not absent, not dramatically different, just slightly off. Responses that used to come within minutes now take longer, without explanation. Conversations that used to flow naturally now have small gaps, small hesitations, small moments where the energy doesn't quite connect the way it did before. Most people, when they notice this, reach for the most convenient explanation. She's busy, work is stressful, she's just tired, and sometimes those explanations are accurate. The critical question is not whether a single instance of inconsistency means something. The question is whether the inconsistency has become the new pattern, whether the irregularity is now more regular than the regularity used to be. Because genuine external stress, work pressure, family difficulty, personal challenges tends to produce a different kind of distraction. It comes with context, with communication about what's happening, with a quality of emotional presence that says, I'm stretched thin right now, but I'm still here, still with you. The distraction that comes from divided attention has a different quality. It's quieter, less explained. And underneath it, if you're paying attention, there's a subtle sense of someone managing their energy rather than sharing it. The second signal is enthusiasm, and this one is harder to quantify, but easier to feel. There is a specific quality to genuine interest, genuine, uncomplicated, undivided interest that comes through in every interaction, in the way someone laughs at something you said, in the way they lean into a conversation, rather than just participating in it, in the spontaneous quality of their engagement, the sense that being with you is something they're choosing fully in this moment, not just going along with. When that quality diminishes, something in the interaction feels thinner. The conversations are still happening, the time is still being spent, but the aliveness in it has dropped. There's a performative quality that wasn't there before, a sense that the person is present in body, but slightly elsewhere in mind. Again, this alone proves nothing. People have off days. Energy fluctuates naturally. The question is duration and pattern. A single low-energy day means nothing. A consistent drop in the quality of presence over weeks means something. The third signal is the one most people notice last, even though in retrospect it was the first one that changed. Initiation. Think about the early dynamics of the relationship. Who reached out first? Who suggested plans? Who sent a message that didn't need to be sent? The random thought, the unprompted check-in, the spontaneous expression of interest that had no practical purpose, except to say, "I'm thinking about you." When attention shifts, initiation drops first, because initiation is the purest expression of directed desire. You initiate contact with someone because they're in your thoughts, because the pull toward them is active enough to produce action. When that pull begins to divide, when another source of attention has entered the picture, the spontaneous, unprompted initiation is the first thing that dries up. She still responds when you reach out. She still shows up when plans are made. But the reaching and the making increasingly comes from one direction, and that asymmetry, if you're honest with yourself, was not always there. Now let's talk about what most men do when they start feeling this, because the typical response makes everything worse. The instinct is to chase clarity, to ask questions, to probe, to try to identify the specific thing that changed so it can be addressed, fixed, explained away. This instinct is completely understandable, and it is almost always counterproductive. Here's why. The moment you begin visibly tracking the signals, the moment your behavior shifts in response to the shift you're sensing, you have handed over a significant amount of control. You have made your emotional state legible. You have communicated clearly and without ambiguity that you are tracking her engagement levels, and that your sense of security depends on what you find. And that communication, that visible dependence on her attention for your own stability, changes the dynamic immediately. Not in the direction you want, because the energy of pursuit and questioning and emotional reaction does not create attraction. It confirms a loss of it. It signals that you have already felt the shift, that it has destabilized you, and that you are now operating from a position of insecurity. And insecurity, however understandable, is not a state that draws people back toward you. The men who navigate this dynamic best are the ones who feel the shift, who recognize it clearly and honestly, and then do nothing reactive, who absorb the information without leaking the fact that they've absorbed it, who continue moving forward in their own direction with their own energy, without adjusting their behavior in ways that telegraph anxiety, not because they're playing games, but because their stability was never fully dependent on her attention in the first place. There's a deeper principle underneath all of this, and it's worth understanding clearly because it applies far beyond this specific situation. Behavior is driven by perception, not always by reality. What this means practically is that the signals you're reading are not necessarily the product of conscious decision-making on her part. She may not have made any deliberate choice. There may not be a clear narrative she could give you if you asked, but at the level of attention and energy and internal focus, something has shifted, and that shift is producing behavioral outputs that are real, even if the person producing them isn't fully aware of doing so. This matters, because it means the situation is often more fluid than it appears. The attention that has partially moved somewhere else has not necessarily been permanently committed. Divided attention is not the same as a made decision. The pattern you're reading is a signal, not a verdict, but here is what determines which direction it goes from here. And this is the part that is almost entirely within your control. Your response to what you're sensing either reinforces the drift or reverses it. A man who reacts with anxiety, with interrogation, with visible need, that man confirms that the energy moving away from him was moving in the right direction. He becomes less, not more, in that moment. A man who recognizes the pattern, stays grounded, continues investing in his own direction, and doesn't contract around the uncertainty. That man presents something different, something that the divided attention has to reckon with, a presence that doesn't collapse under the pressure of being tested. So here is what it comes down to. The signals are real, the pattern is consistent, and once you know what to look for, you will never misread it again. Consistency drops first, then enthusiasm thins. Then initiation becomes asymmetric, and underneath all of it, if you're honest and paying attention, there is a quality to the interaction that has shifted, something you feel before you can explain it, something that knows before your mind is ready to accept what it knows. The question is never whether you should trust what you're feeling. You should. Your instincts in this domain are more accurate than you give them credit for. The question is what you do with it, and the answer is simpler than most men want to believe. You don't chase, you don't interrogate, you don't perform for recovered attention. You return to yourself, to your own direction, to the things that were building your life. Before this dynamic became the center of your attention, because the man who remains grounded when everything around him is shifting, who doesn't need the situation to resolve in a particular way in order to stay stable, that man is not someone whose attention is easy to move away from, and that stability, quiet and unperformed, is the only real answer to the question you've been asking.